We are so thrilled to have you with us tonight, and we want to start with a very simple question. Why is the U.S.-Israel relationship important to you?
Well, I think certainly for the Arizonans in the room, they will already know this answer. But for those who I haven't had an opportunity to meet, I think what I would first start by saying is my own experience. You know, I was really privileged years ago to travel to Israel and see firsthand what the nature of the U.S.-Israel relationship means on the ground to people living in Israel every single day. And I often tell my colleagues that while the relationship is important, because Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East and our greatest partner, the relationship is particularly important because it's critical to the long-term national security of the United States. It matters to us that we keep this relationship close. It matters to our country and our future. And it serves as a beacon and an example to countries all over the world of what democracy, partnership, and alliance for freedom can look like.
As we were talking, I was telling you that my family in central Israel spent their morning in a bomb shelter. They were hearing the sirens, hearing the explosions of the rockets fired from Gaza this morning. I know you've traveled to Israel and visited with some of the affected communities.
I have, and in fact, when I traveled to Israel for my second visit ever, which was in the summer of 2013, we visited with communities that lived very close to the Gaza border, a beautiful community. And we visited a playground, and it really hit me that there were bomb shelters on a playground at an elementary school designed for children ages 5 through 8. And in my first career, I was a social worker, and I worked in elementary school, helping kids and families deal with life and difficulties and challenges. And I reflected at that moment that while I was focused on helping kids and families in their difficult lives, all the years that I worked in Sunny Slope, Phoenix, Arizona, never once did I have to think about a bomb shelter. Never once did I have to think about the immediate physical safety of the children that I was working with. And every time I travel to Israel and see the danger that communities live in, it reminds me how important it is that we, as members of Congress and senators, do our part in protecting Israel, ensuring that she has what she needs to defend herself from these horrific types of activities like we saw this morning.
Now, you and I first met at an AIPAC event in Arizona a couple of years back. You know how important it is at AIPAC to educate candidates who are running for Congress, running for office, because the minute they are sworn in, they may have a vote to take that impacts Israel. And your first vote in the Senate was actually the motion to proceed on the bill S1, the Strengthening America's Security in the Middle East Act. You voted yes when many of your colleagues did not, and we want to know why.
So this was, I don't want anyone to get too bored with all the boring political stuff, but much of what happens in Washington today is the result of a broken and dysfunctional system. And so issues that should be what I call no-brainers, bipartisan, where we all work together and agree with each other, often get tangled up in a partisan morass. And that is exactly what happened when I first got to the United States Senate. You all will recall we were in the midst of a ridiculous, wasteful government shutdown. And there was an attempt, yeah, it was ridiculous. And there was an attempt to politicize the United States' support for Israel and her defense systems. And I was unwilling to allow that politicization to happen. I'm not going to do it. So I chose to vote yes on the legislation because I believe in the legislation. That's it. I believe in it. But I do think what we've seen, in particular in this session of Congress, with this extreme kind of escalation of the partisanship and politicization, is that this votes, such as that first vote we took for the first entire week of the Senate, and votes that we will continue to take, provide an opportunity for those of us who are committed to the U.S.-Israel relationship to push the partisanship aside focus on the issue, and recommit to the shared relationship that the US and Israel have, and to remind our colleagues and teach others how important this relationship is for national security.
Now, in 2015, you were one of 24 House Democratic members to vote against the Iran nuclear deal. As you look at Iran now, what are your thoughts about how the United States should move forward on our Iran policy?
Well, I could talk for a long time about why I voted no on the Iran deal, but I think I spoke with half of the people in this room personally about it. So for me, that was a very important decision. And during my service in the House, that was one of the most important votes I cast. And I believe that I made the right vote. I will tell you this, a friend of mine came to me about a year later, and he said to me, Kirsten, I just want you to feel better about your vote on the Iran deal, because we've looked at it, and it turns out that that's actually the issue that is hurting me the most in my district. This is someone who voted the other direction. And I smiled and said, I don't need to feel better about it. I always felt good about it. Like, it was the right vote.
You're good.
I'm good. But the reasons I voted no on the deal are the same reasons that I'm concerned about where we are right now. Iran is growing as a global superpower, and unfortunately, as a result of the deal, has gained access to cash, to increasing access to global capital, and to normalized relationships with other countries, not just in the Middle East, but in Europe as well. So Iran is gaining access to weapons, and Iran, equally importantly, is gaining access to political and financial capital in the world, which means that in 5, 10, or more years, the threat of an Iran, without very strict controls around it, becomes that much more amplified. And I think that it's our duty now to reach out to our partners in Europe as well as other parts of the world to make sure that everyone sees the growing threat from Iran, and that we work together in a coordinated fashion to push back and replace those controls around Iran. You know, I remember when we were going through the debate around that legislation, one of my colleagues said to me, well, this is 10 years. 10 years is a long time. And in American politics, 10 years is a long time. But in a country like Iran, without democratic elections, 10 years is a blink of an eye. They can just hold on until those 10 years end, and during that time, amass control and become more and more dangerous. It's our job to work together in a coordinated fashion to make sure they don't have the ability to do that.
Great. And so one of the issues that you've worked on during your time in the House and now in the Senate was countering terror financing. And as you've spoken about, because I've heard you, Iran can finance Hamas, it can finance Hezbollah, even Al-Qaeda. How can we do more to crack down on that cash flow?
I'm so glad you brought that up, because they are actually the main source of financing for terrorism in the world. They're not the only source, but they are certainly one of the largest sources. We've passed legislation in a bipartisan way that has been signed into law by President Trump that has helped make a difference. So right now, federal agencies are required to do an annual report where they actually talk about how they're dealing with counterterrorism financing, how they're using controls and working together across agencies to better track this financing and to crack down on the financing outside of the US through banking and non-banking measures. But we're working on new legislation that actually helps the agencies become more modern. I know, surprising, the federal government is not quite modern. So one of the things we really have to do is help these agencies catch up, become more modern so that we can track these transactions as they happen in real time, and interdict them before they make it to their end result, which of course is in the hands of terrorists. So that legislation, I think you'll see moving later this year. It's going to be bipartisan. We expect it to pass. We expect President Trump to support it. And it gives our government more tools to not just stop these transactions, but track them as they're beginning to happen so they don't get completed.
And finally tonight, an issue that I think is on everybody's mind, which is the increasing polarization in our politics. and you've really made it a point to reach across the political aisle to get things done on this issue and many issues. Why is bipartisanship important to you, and do you feel there's a way to push back against that heightened polarization?
I'm so glad you've asked this question, though if you'd asked it at the beginning, we would never have made it to the other questions, because I could talk about this all night. I firmly believe that the country needs bipartisanship to solve the challenges that we face. The problems we have domestically as well as internationally are too great to be handled by one party being in control or trying to play gotcha or getcha with the other party, which is so much of what we see today. We have to rise above that. We have to. We cannot afford the petty politics of the past. And so I remain firmly committed to engaging in bipartisan action in everything that I do, whether it's standing strong for the U.S.-Israel relationship or, frankly, any other issue I work on, because that is what America deserves. It is what our forefathers did to create the country that we enjoy today, and it is what we owe to our kids and our grandkids so that they can have a country that they can also enjoy and be proud of tomorrow. It is our duty.
Arizona is fortunate. America is fortunate. Senator Kyrsten Sinema, thank you so much for joining us tonight.